Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Linza. I have been an athletic trainer for 14 years and have been with Bon Secours Mercy Health for 8 years now. And today we are going to just go over early sports specialization versus diversification. So I think we can all agree that youth sports participation has many benefits, starting with development of lifelong physical activity skills. They get to socialize with peers, build teamwork and leadership skills. It improves their self-esteem, and they also get to have fun. So just a few statistics for you. In the United States, youth participation in sports has increased from 45 million in 1997 to 60 million in 2008. I was unable to get a super specific total for 2020 now, but there is also increases reported from the National Federation of High School Sports. In 2013, 2014, they reported that 7.8 million high school students were participating in sports. And then the most recent one that I found said 2018, almost 8 million students are participating in just high school sports. So the differences there are youth sports were considered ages 6 to 18, whereas the numbers in the next two bullet points there are just high school students. However, even that has some inaccuracies because it just depends on which high school is maybe registered with the National Federation of High School Sports and who exactly is reporting participation of their students. Not everyone is associated with that. And not only has the number of youth participation changed, but also the culture of youth sports has changed recently. So as participation has gone up overall, the difference in participation of the sports is that early sports specialization has gained popularity tremendously over the past few years. So when it comes to deciding on if you're going to encourage an athlete to specialize or diversify, a few studies have been done. A survey particularly was done between club sport coaches and high school coaches and found, as you would probably expect, that club coaches are more likely to rate early specialization as a positive adaptive practice. Another study in 2016 found that more high school athletes are beginning to specialize earlier because, especially at larger high schools, just because there's increased competition levels to participate on sports teams and get playing time, just because there's more athletes to choose from. And, if they want to participate, then they have to look at gaining the skills that they need to be able to be on that team. And then the important point here on this slide is that often athletes specialize without knowing the various effects that it can have, either good or bad. It's important that as coaches and parents that you guys can assist in educating the athletes on what effects specializing can have. And that's why we're going to go over these things today. So early sport specialization is defined as an intense year-round training in a specific sport with the exclusion of other sports at a young age. Now, this is not to be confused with just recreational sports participation in a single sport. And typically, early sports specialization is designed to produce elite level athletes, whether it be in hopes of gaining a college scholarship to play and then be recognized potentially by professional sports, or just they really want to go to professional sports. So there's a few theories that go along with early sports specialization. And the first is called the 10-year rule. So it's believed that you have a minimum requirement of about 10 years of participation in just the one sport to reach what's considered an expert or elite level. And the theory of deliberate practice goes along with this. So it suggests that it's not simply training of any type, but they're engaging in a deliberate practice necessary to gain the expertise. And it's not just deliberate practice hours over the 10 years, but it's the accumulation also of hours that coincide with crucial periods of biological and cognitive development. And then the second part is called the power law of practice. And facts of this theory is that learning occurs at a rapid rate after they start practicing, but they find that this rate of learning decreases over time as the practice continues. So the more time an individual can devote to practice, the greater their level of achievement, but it also becomes more difficult to make further improvements. So future experts perform training that develops required skills under continuously evolving conditions where training, stress, and recovery are optimally balanced so that maximal training adaptations can occur, and we try to limit and minimize training plateaus. Some considerations that go along with early specialization is ideally a child should have fundamental motor skills. So these fundamental skills are things such as running, jumping, kicking, and throwing. They found that if a child has an immature level of fundamental skill development, they may attempt to play organized sport, but their experience may not be as positive as if they were developmentally ready to learn the sport-specific skills. So having an adequate level of physical maturation and developmental age will help the children to learn the sport-specific skills that require strength and speed. And also knowledge that an individual possesses about a specific sport can increase their ability to learn the sport-related skills required to play the sport. The more they know about a sport, the more they will remember important points necessary for the performance of their motor skills. If there's no motivation to learn, then learning is not likely to take place. And sometimes the best indicator of a child's readiness to learn and participate in a sport comes from them first expressing interest. Some concerns that are brought up very often with early specialization is first, overuse injuries. This happens because the key factor that separates young athletes from mature athletes is the fact that children are still growing. So these constant changes in body weight, height, and muscle mass are providing stress to joints in addition to the sport stresses. So However, despite the overall health benefit of sports participation, any sports activity invites a chance of sustaining an injury. However, this potential for injury increases as the intensity level and training volume increases. So this just supports the need for adequate recovery for youth sports athletes, which doesn't necessarily mean taking them out of all activity, but adequate recovery could just be a break from that particular sport while remaining still physically active, which is considered active recovery. They just need rest from the repetitive motions that are being placed on the body, which causes the stress and overuse injuries. The amount of overuse injuries is difficult to assess, particularly, but some reports state that overuse injuries account for almost 50% of athletic injuries overall. The next thing that is a concern is burnout, which is defined as a physical and emotional exhaustion from the psychological and physiological demands of the athlete's sport. And it's also defined as a long-term decrease in performance without evidence of injury, or also called staleness. So oftentimes this can become so severe that it causes withdrawal or dropout from the activities that were previously enjoyable to the athlete. And some statistics I found that youth who specialize early, oftentimes 70% of them drop out of sports by age 13 and 80% drop out by age 15. The next thing of a concern is physical literacy, which often is negatively impacted because the children are have limited opportunities to explore different movement patterns. If they're just performing the same sport over and over, they're just going to use the same movement patterns over and over. They also lose out on social contacts with other sports. They lose out on transferable athletic skills. And there's also just the loss of influence of coaches of other sports. I know a lot of times just having that interaction with different coaches and different peers can just give a lot more education and perspective on sports as well. So the alternative to specialization is sports diversification. So this favors an involvement in a number of different sports. And this method not only exposes children to a multitude of sports, but it has a focus on playing instead of practicing. So this then provides an environment that may nurture a genuine love for a sport so that then productive and structured practice may follow. Sorry, I have to follow in my notes here. Play-like involvement in the early diversification also is beneficial for developing intrinsic motivation required, like I said, when they are ready to become begin the development of more structured and effortful training. There was a study done in 2003 where expert decision makers from the sports of basketball, netball, and field hockey were examined, and they indicated that participation in other relevant activities, such as sports where dynamic decision making is necessary, that during their early phases of development, this participation in other relevant activities actually augmented the physical and cognitive skills necessary in their primary sport. The sports diversification group here also, there was a study done that showed positive effect on strength, speed, endurance, and gross motor coordination. And another study done on boys ages 10 to 12 that spent a lot of hours in various sports or diversifying performed better on a standing broad jump, which is kind of shown in this picture here, and gross motor coordination than boys that were restricted to a single sport. So our understanding of the mechanisms by which diversification influences skill development is limited. However, it's likely linked to a transfer of learning and the effects of cross-training. So some of these transferable elements have been separated into 3 elements, which are movement, perceptual, and conceptual. So the movement element refers to the biomechanical and the anatomical actions required to perform the task. So for example, throwing a baseball overhand and an overhand serve in tennis share similar movement elements. The perceptual elements refer to environmental information that individuals interpret to make performance-related decisions. So for example, in this, field hockey and soccer both require participants to accurately interpret the actions of their opponents in order to be successful. Therefore, these sports share the perceptual element. And lastly, the conceptual elements refer to strategies, guidelines, and rules regarding the performance. There is evidence that a physical conditioning category should also be added to this list of the transferable performance elements. And one of these physical conditioning effects that are studied is cross-training, and it provides support for the notion that just general cardiovascular effects can be transferred. And typically researchers have found that cross-training effects are more likely to occur between sports that share similar modes of activity than between dissimilar modes of activity. Physical and cognitive abilities may develop quicker when you play multiple sports instead of one because of the potential crossover effect from multiple sports as well. So for example, instead of only developing hand-eye coordination as it pertains to hitting and throwing a baseball, a child playing baseball and soccer can also develop foot and eye coordination, footwork, and running mechanics. There was another interesting study that I saw that found that sports specializers are also less likely to participate in sport as young adults, whereas non-specializers, or those who did sports diversification, they participated more just to stay in shape, learn skills, and feel more confident about their physical abilities. So in conclusion, a few things here. Early sports specialization is not necessarily an essential ingredient for exceptional sports performance as an adult. Evidence shows that athletes with a diversified sports background were not at a disadvantage compared to those who specialized early. Also, the AOSSM consensus statement is quoted here. I forgot my other quote, but it says, early sports specialization is not a requirement for success at the highest levels of competition and is believed to be unhealthy physically, mentally for young athletes. It also discourages unstructured free play, which has many benefits. My goodness, I'm seeing all kinds of typos here. And some degree of specialization is necessary to achieve elite status. However, intense training in one sport with the exclusion of others is not really recommended until late adolescence to decrease risk of injury and stress. And I just got a few other statistics here that aren't necessarily on my slide that I'll share with you, but in regards to that last statement of training later, studies have definitely found that optimal timing of specialization is becoming clearer, and it definitely starts to relate in the later years of high school. Once athletes have had a chance to play multiple sports, gain skills that kind of cross over, and really just decide on which sport they really enjoy the most, just helps, like I said before, with that motivation and desire to focus on that specific training things that you put in. The amount of time that experts and non-experts spent in training was not significantly different until after 18 years of age. So after this age, experts dramatically increased in their commitment to training. There's some studies that have shown that Division I NCAA athletes are more likely to have played multiple sports in high school, and their first organized sport was actually different than their current one. Many examples also exist of pro athletes who have learned skills that cross over to their current sport by playing a variety of sports in high school and even college. There were actually 322 athletes invited to the 2015 NFL Scouting Combine, and 87% of these played multiple sports in high school, whereas only 13 only played football. 13% that was. Other studies of elite athletes have shown that intense training did not start until late adolescence, and that these athletes played other sports before specializing. For the majority of sports, late specialization with early diversification is most likely to lead to elite status. In addition, athletes who engaged in sport-specific training at a young age typically had shorter athletic careers. So based on this evidence that I've shared with you today, I just wanted to encourage that parents and educators or coaches should help provide opportunities for unstructured play to improve motor skill development, and youth should be encouraged to participate in a variety of sports during their growing years to influence the development of diverse motor skills. For those who do choose to specialize in a single sport, periods of intense training and specialized sport activities should be closely monitored for indicators of burnout, overuse injury, or just decrements in performance due to overtraining. Lastly, the evidence indicates that all youth should be involved in periodized strength and conditioning, which is integrative neuromuscular training, to help them prepare for the demands of competitive sports participation. And youth who specialize in single sport should plan periods of isolated and focused integrative neuromuscular training to enhance a diverse motor skill development and reduce injury factors. So just to explain this, integrative neuromuscular training is a conceptual training model that is defined as supplemental training program that incorporates both fundamental movements and specific exercises targeted to motor control deficits, and strength and conditioning activities that are designed to enhance health and skill-related components of physical fitness. That is all today. Thank you for watching this session. Please be sure to go fill out the survey link found on the Bon Secours virtual training page. This will help us to improve our videos and present more topics that you might be interested in. Have a great day.